You don't even like her that way. I know. Then why do you look at her like that? Sarah. I said I know, okay? She didn't know. That was the whole problem. She had said the words, I know, I know, I know, so many times in the last 3 weeks that they had stopped meaning anything. They had become something she repeated like a prayer, like if she said it enough, it would finally become true. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Her name was Sarah Whitfield, 29 years old, apartment 4B. A woman who believed, until very recently, that she understood herself reasonably well. And then Nadia moved in next door. That was 2 months ago. 2 months since the elevator door opened, and a woman with paint-stained fingers and a box too heavy for one person stood there looking at Sarah like she was slightly inconvenient and slightly interesting at the same time. 2 months since Sarah said, without thinking, I can help you with that. 2 months since everything that used to feel settled stopped being settled, because Nadia Laurent was not single, and Sarah had known that from the very first day. She had known it when she saw the second name on the moving boxes, when she heard the phone calls that always ended the same way, soft and deliberate. Good night. I love you too. When Nadia mentioned, casually, over borrowed coffee, and a Tuesday that felt like it meant nothing. My girlfriend is moving out here in the spring. She got a job transfer. Spring was 4 months away, and Sarah had looked at her coffee mug and said, That's great. And she had meant it. She had meant it completely, right up until the moment she realized she didn't mean it at all. Sarah was the kind of woman who had always known exactly where she was going. She had moved to Chicago at 24 with a clear plan, a job in urban planning, a decent apartment, a social life that fit neatly around her work schedule. She had always been the organized one, the reliable one, the one her friends called when they needed someone to think clearly under pressure. She didn't do complicated. She didn't do situations she couldn't map out in advance. She had had relationships. 2 of them that lasted more than a year. One that almost felt like love, in the way a photograph almost feels like the real thing. It has the right shapes, the right colors, but when you reach for it, your hand finds paper. She had never asked herself the question her friend Lena had asked her on the phone that night. She had never had a reason to. Her apartment was the kind of place that looked like someone lived carefully in it. Plants she actually remembered to water. Books organized by author. A kitchen that functioned. She had built her life the way she approached everything, with intention, with method, with a low tolerance for the kind of chaos that came from wanting something you shouldn't want. She was good at not wanting things she shouldn't want. She had always been good at that. And then Nadia. Nadia Laurent was 31, and she painted murals for a living. Not the kind of thing Sarah had ever fully understood. How a person could make a life out of something so unpredictable, so dependent on other people seeing what you were doing and deciding it was worth paying for. But Nadia didn't seem to think about it the way Sarah thought about it. She talked about her work the way you talk about something you can't imagine not doing. Not with the certainty that it would work out. Just with the quiet acceptance that there was no other option worth considering. She had moved to Chicago for a commission. A mural on the side of a building in Wicker Park. Something about the neighborhood's history. Something large enough that it would take most of the winter. Her girlfriend, whose name was Priya, Sarah knew this. Sarah had cataloged this fact carefully and placed it somewhere prominent in her mind, was still in Boston, finishing out her contract before the transfer. Nadia had arrived with 6 boxes, a drafting table, and an energy that was difficult to categorize. She was not loud. She didn't try to be interesting. She had a way of being in a room that made the room feel slightly more awake, like a window had been cracked open somewhere, and now there was air where there hadn't been air before. The first time Sarah helped her carry boxes, Nadia had said, "You didn't have to do this." Not as a courtesy, as a genuine observation. Sarah had said, I know. And Nadia had looked at her for a beat too long and said, Okay then. That was the whole conversation. But Sarah had thought about it 3 times before she went to sleep that night, and she hadn't understood why until much later. They had fallen into an easy proximity the way neighbors sometimes do in buildings where the walls are thin and the hallways are narrow, and there's only one decent coffee shop within walking distance. They went there on Saturday mornings, sometimes by coincidence and then not by coincidence. Nadia would knock on her door when she ran out of something. Olive oil, a phone charger, once an opinion on whether 2 shades of blue were actually different, or if she was losing her mind. They're different, Sarah had said, looking at the 2 swatches. Which one is better? Sarah had pointed. Nadia had smiled. Not the polite kind, but the kind that happened when something landed right, and said, I thought so too. I just needed someone else to see it. Sarah had held on to that sentence for a long time. Not because it was significant, because it wasn't. Because it was nothing. Because this was a person who talked to her about paint colors and borrowed her olive oil, and had a girlfriend named Priya who was coming in the spring. Sarah was good at keeping things in their proper category. She kept telling herself that. It was a Wednesday in November when Sarah noticed the first thing she wasn't supposed to notice. They were in Nadia's apartment. Nadia had asked her to look at something. A sketch she was developing for the second panel of the mural. Something she was unsure about. A figure in the background that she kept redrawing. Sarah was sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, and Nadia was cross-legged beside her, holding a sketchbook. And at some point, Nadia turned to say something and stopped. Because Sarah was already looking at her. Not at the sketch. At her. Nadia didn't say anything immediately. Neither did Sarah. There was a moment, 2 seconds, maybe 3, where neither of them moved. Then Sarah looked down at the sketchbook and said, The figure works better when the shoulder is lower. It looks more natural. Right, Nadia said. Yeah. And that was it. That was the entire thing. But on the walk back to her own apartment, 12 steps down the hallway, Sarah stood in front of her door for a moment before going inside. She stood there and she thought, nothing happened. And then, why is my heart beating like something happened? She went inside. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop and did not think about it. Except she did. Quietly and persistently, and in the way that things you're trying not to think about have of taking up exactly the space you're refusing to give them. She started noticing things she hadn't let herself notice before. The way Nadia laughed. Not the polite version, but the real one, which was slightly too loud and involved her closing her eyes for a half-second, like laughing was something she did with her whole body. The way she listened. Not the kind of listening where someone waits for their turn to speak. The kind that felt like full attention, like the person across from her was the only thing currently worth looking at. The way, when they were at the coffee shop and Nadia was telling a story, she would sometimes reach across the table and touch Sarah's arm to make a point. Not lingering. Just a touch. The kind that meant nothing. Sarah started cataloging these moments, and then felt ridiculous for cataloging them, and then cataloged them anyway. She called Lena one night and said, talking around the whole thing, "Do you ever find yourself more aware of someone than you expected to be?" Lena had been quiet for a second and then said, "Who?" "No one specific. I'm speaking generally." "You've never spoken generally in your life, Sarah." "I'm starting." Lena had let it go. For then. In December, there was a night when the heat went out in the building. It was a Tuesday, 11 degrees outside, and the super had confirmed it wouldn't be fixed until morning. Sarah had an extra space heater. Nadia had a couch with a pull-out. The logic was practical. The decision was easy. Except lying there on the pull-out, listening to Nadia's even breathing from the bedroom, Sarah had felt something she didn't have a category for. Not longing, exactly. Something quieter than that, something that felt like being in a place you hadn't known you were looking for, and not being sure what to do with having found it. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. She thought, this is just a warm apartment and a person you like spending time with. She thought, you're fine. She went to sleep eventually. But something had shifted. She could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives. Not in any specific thing, but in the air itself, in the quality of the light, in the way your body knows something your mind hasn't named yet. She started being more careful. She started answering Nadia's knocks a little more slowly, suggesting the coffee shop a little less, keeping their conversations shorter, more practical, more firmly on the side of what they were supposed to be. Nadia noticed. She didn't say anything for almost a week, and then one afternoon she knocked, and when Sarah opened the door, Nadia just looked at her and said, "Did I do something?" Sarah said, "No, of course not." Nadia held her gaze. "Okay." But the way she said it was not the way you say okay when everything is okay. Sarah had a theory about herself. The theory was that she was someone who dealt with things by understanding them. If she could map something out, trace its origin, name its parts, predict where it was going, she could manage it. She had managed most of her life this way. The relationships that didn't work had ended cleanly because she had seen the end coming and walked toward it with open eyes. The job that wasn't right had been left carefully, professionally, with 2 weeks' notice and a transition plan. She was good at being in control of what happened to her. The problem with what was happening now was that it did not respond to understanding. She understood it perfectly. She understood that Nadia was her neighbor, that Nadia had a girlfriend, that Nadia was leaving when the mural was finished, and her girlfriend arrived, and their life together in Chicago began. She understood that what she was feeling was inconvenient and irrational and had no viable future. She could map every part of it, and none of that made it smaller. In January, she tried harder. She accepted an invitation from a woman she'd met at a work event, someone named Claire, practical and funny, who texted clearly and asked straightforward questions. They had dinner twice. The dinners were good. Claire was interesting. Sarah came home from the second dinner and stood in the hallway and heard music coming from Nadia's apartment, something low and unhurried, and felt a pull so specific it was almost embarrassing. She did not knock. She went inside. She sat on her couch and had a conversation with herself that was long and honest and somewhat painful, and at the end of it she had arrived at the following conclusion. She could not keep pretending this was nothing, but she also could not do anything about it. So the only available option was to live with it, to be near Nadia without being close to her, to care without expressing it, to hold the whole thing quietly until Nadia left and took the feeling with her. It seemed like a reasonable plan. It was not a reasonable plan. Because 2 days later, Nadia knocked on her door at 9 p.m. with red eyes and a bottle of wine she hadn't opened and said, I just need to sit somewhere that isn't my apartment." Sarah stepped back from the door without asking why. They sat on her couch for a while without talking. Nadia poured 2 glasses. Sarah didn't ask. Eventually, Nadia said, "She wants to push the move to the fall. She got an extension on the project in Boston." Sarah said, "I'm sorry." Nadia looked at her wine glass. "We've been doing long distance for 2 years. This was supposed to be the year it stopped. That's hard. I keep thinking..." She stopped. Started again. "I keep thinking about what I'm building here. The mural, the apartment, all of it. And I don't know if I'm building it for us or just for me." Sarah didn't say anything. She knew that the right thing, the safe thing, was to say something supportive and practical. To be the good neighbor. The uncomplicated friend. Instead, she said quietly, "What does it feel like when you picture the fall?" Nadia looked at her. "When you picture her being here," Sarah said carefully, What does it feel like? The silence lasted a long time. I don't know, Nadia said finally. And then, softer. That's the problem. They didn't talk about it after that. They finished the wine, and Nadia went back to her apartment and Sarah did the dishes and went to bed. Lay there in the dark thinking about the question she had asked and the silence that had followed it, and what it meant that Nadia hadn't given the answer Sarah had expected her to give. She thought, "You are doing the wrong thing." She thought, "You are in love with someone who is in a relationship, and you asked her a question that you had no right to ask." She thought. She didn't answer. She turned the light off. She didn't sleep for a long time. In February, they found a new rhythm. Quieter, more careful. They still had coffee on Saturdays. They still talked. But there was something in the air between them that had not been there before. Something that had been named without being spoken, catalogued without being acknowledged. Sarah was very aware of the distance she was keeping, and she suspected Nadia was aware of it too, and neither of them said anything about it, because saying something would make it real in a way that right now it was possible, just barely possible, to pretend it wasn't. And then came the night with the storm, a February ice storm, the kind that shuts the city down in a matter of hours. Sarah had been working late and barely made it home before the roads closed. She came in from the cold, coat-soaked, to find Nadia standing in the hallway outside their apartments, looking at her phone with an expression that Sarah couldn't read. Her flight got canceled, Nadia said. She wasn't looking up from her phone. Sarah understood that Priya had been coming to visit, the first visit since November. She stood there in her wet coat and said, "I'm sorry." Nadia looked up then, looked at Sarah. "Are you?" she said. Not cruel, not accusing, just a question. Just a thing she wanted to know. Sarah held her gaze and did not answer. That was an answer. Nadia looked at her for a moment longer. Then she said quietly, "Do you want to have dinner? I already made too much." Sarah should have said no. She said yes. They ate, and they talked, and the storm got worse outside, and neither of them acknowledged the question or the non-answer, or what any of it meant. They talked about the mural, almost finished now. They talked about the neighborhood. They talked about small things. But the whole time, underneath every sentence, there was the weight of what they were not saying. At the end of the night, Nadia stood at Sarah's door to say goodnight. She said, "Sarah." Sarah said, "Yeah." Nadia looked at her, started to say something, stopped. Then, "Good night." "Good night," Sarah said. She closed the door, leaned against it. Her heart was doing that thing again. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something you recognize. That feeling you try to name and can't quite. The one that lives somewhere between your chest and your throat and won't let you breathe the way you usually breathe. So click the like button right now. It's a small thing, but it helps me keep bringing stories like this one to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and hit the bell, so YouTube tells you when the next story drops. Now tell me in the comments. Have you ever been close to someone and felt something you weren't supposed to feel, and had to decide whether to pretend it wasn't there? What did you do? Write it for me. I read every single one. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'll heart every answer. Now, back to our story. The mural was finished on a Thursday in late February. Sarah knew because Nadia knocked on her door that evening with paint in her hair and a look on her face that was not happiness exactly, but the particular exhaustion of someone who has just finished something large and real. She said, "Come see it?" They took the train to Wicker Park in the cold, stood in front of the building together. Sarah tilted her head back and looked at it. The whole long side of the wall, the figures and the colors and the scale of it, All the months of work that had lived in Nadia's apartment as sketches and samples and arguments with herself. Now out here, permanent, belonging to the city. She said, "Nadia." "I know," Nadia said. "It's extraordinary." Nadia was quiet. She was looking at it too, but differently. The way you look at something you've lived inside for too long and can finally see from the outside. Then she said, "I'm supposed to feel done." "I don't feel done." Sarah looked at her. "The mural's done," Nadia said, "but I don't feel—" She stopped, started again, carefully. "Priya comes in 6 weeks." Sarah said nothing. "I've been thinking," Nadia said, "about what I told you, what you asked me back in January, what it would feel like when she got here." "Nadia, I've been avoiding thinking about it because I didn't want to know the answer." Sarah kept her eyes on the mural. "You don't have to tell me." "I know I don't." A pause. "But I think I need to say it to someone, even if I can't—" She stopped. "It doesn't feel the way it used to feel, when I picture it. It feels like going back to a version of myself that I've been slowly growing out of. And I don't know if that's the distance or the time or something else." Sarah turned to look at her then. "Something else," she said quietly. Nadia looked back at her, and there it was. The thing they had been not saying for months, suddenly present in the 6 inches of cold air between them, visible as a held breath. Sarah's pulse was loud in her own ears. She was acutely aware of how little she trusted herself in this moment, aware that she had opinions about what should happen next, and that those opinions were not neutral. She said, carefully and deliberately, "You need to figure out what you want. Not what I want, not what's convenient, what you actually want." Nadia's jaw tightened. "What if what I want is the problem? Then it's still yours to deal with." "Sarah, I'm serious." She held her ground. The kindest thing she could do was not make this easier. "You have a relationship. You have someone who loves you. Whatever you're feeling right now, you have to be the one to decide what to do with it. I can't do that for you." Nadia looked at her for a long time. Then she looked back at the mural. "I know," she said finally. "I know." They took the train home without talking much. And Sarah, for the first time in 3 months, felt something that surprised her. Not tension, not longing, but clarity. A strange, quiet clarity about who she was in the situation and what she was and was not willing to do. She was not willing to be the reason someone else's relationship fell apart. She was not willing to want something that hadn't been freely chosen. She was, she realized, someone with actual standards, someone who cared about doing this right, even if doing it right meant not getting what she wanted. She had thought she was the vulnerable one in this situation, the one waiting, the one wanting. But sitting on that train, watching the city slide past the dark window, she understood something she hadn't understood before. She was not the one who was lost here. Nadia was the one who was lost. And Sarah, who had always thought of herself as the structured one, the planned one, the one who didn't do complicated, was the one who was clear. She had wanted Nadia. She still wanted Nadia. But she wanted her freely, or not at all. That was not vulnerability. That was the most specific kind of strength. 3 weeks later, Nadia knocked on her door at 7 a.m. Sarah opened it in yesterday's clothes, coffee already in hand, and found Nadia standing there looking like she hadn't slept, but not like she was falling apart. Like someone who had been awake doing the hard thing, and the hard thing was done. And now she was standing in the hallway on the other side of it. She said, "I talked to Priya." Sarah said nothing, waited. "Last night, for a long time." Nadia exhaled. "It was It was honest. It was the most honest we've been in probably a year. And it hurt. A lot. She paused. She said she knew. She said she'd been feeling it too. That we'd been holding something together out of habit. Out of love too, but mostly habit. Sarah wrapped both hands around her mug. She's not coming, Nadia said. I didn't end it because of you. I need you to understand that. I ended it because it was already ending and I'd been refusing to look at it. I know, Sarah said. I don't want you to feel like... Nadia. Sarah met her eyes. I know. Nadia looked at her. Something in her face shifted. The careful composure she'd been holding breaking just slightly at the edges, the tiredness underneath showing through. I'm not okay yet, she said. I know that too. I don't know what I'm asking you. Sarah thought about that. About all the months of wanting carefully, of keeping the right distance, of choosing not to become the easy reason for something that needed to be reckoned with honestly. She thought about who she had turned out to be in this story. Not the one waiting to be chosen. Not the one who needed reassurance, but the one who had held a line because she knew what she was worth. She stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. I'll make you coffee. Nadia looked at her for a moment. Then she stepped inside. They sat at Sarah's kitchen table. Nadia held her mug with both hands and looked out the window at the gray February morning, and Sarah sat across from her and did not try to fill the silence or comfort it or move it forward. She let it be exactly what it was, the beginning of something that was going to go at its own pace, in its own direction, with no promises about where it landed. Nadia said, after a while, I've been thinking about the mural. There's a figure in the third panel. I changed it 3 times. I could never get it right. I remember, Sarah said. I figured out what was wrong with it. She looked up. I was painting her the way I thought she should look, not the way she actually looked. Sarah held her gaze across the table. Sometimes, she said, it takes a long time to see what's actually there. Nadia's mouth curved. Not the polite version. The real one. Slightly too much, eyes almost closing. Yeah, she said. It does. Outside, the morning was getting lighter by degrees. The coffee was warm. The kitchen was quiet. There was nothing settled yet. No declaration, no certainty, no clean resolution. There was only 2 women at a table in the early morning, one of them finding her way back to herself, the other already there, already clear, already sure of what she was willing to give and what she needed in return. The one who had seemed stronger had been the one who was hiding. The one who had seemed to be waiting had been the one who knew exactly where she stood. That was the inversion. That was the whole thing. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that happens in a kitchen at 7 a.m. over 2 cups of coffee when 2 people finally stop pretending they don't see each other. Sarah had spent months believing she was the uncertain one in the room. She wasn't. She had known what she wanted. She had known what she was worth. She had known, even when it hurt, that she would not accept less than something real. That's not waiting. That's knowing yourself. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay exactly who you are, while everything around you figures itself out. If this story moved you in some way, write discovery in the comments. That way I know you made it to the end with us. And if you want to keep going, if you want more stories about the kind of love that asks you to be honest before it asks you to be brave, click the video appearing on your screen right now. A big hug, and until our next story.